welcome everybody to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Groom. We're going to get right into things. We have somebody who is a fellow podcaster on. They have their own creative studio. But I just thought, with this season 6 that we're in, we're switching things up. Founders are across different industries, and so I want to make sure that I show some love, so show some appreciation to fellow creators. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up the founder of Could Be Pretty Cool, and her name is Kacie Lauder. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring her on the stage. How's it
Thank
going,
you.
Kacie?
Hi, Kenny. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yes, yes, yes. We're both living similar lives at this point from a creative perspective, but the path that you're taking, being a founder, starting something on your own, that's unique to you. So we want to make sure that our guests get a good idea of the journey that you've been on to get to this point. So could you just start us out? Let us know a little bit before you started. Could Be Pretty Cool. Like, what were you doing? Were there any inclinations to you being a founder prior to you starting this company?
Absolutely. So, could be pretty cool. Formally started on paper in December of 2019, but we didn't actually like become a thing until I would say May of 2020. Before I knew what a podcast was, before I knew anything about the industry or that I would be a part of it, I was working primarily in live theater. So, both on the admin side, doing marketing and fundraising for nonprofit theaters here in Atlanta, and also on the audio side. So, I did sound design for different plays all throughout the metro Atlanta area. And that's kind of what I did circa April 2020 when all of the live theater closed because of the pandemic. I found myself with a lot of extra time on my hands. And fortunately, that is also when everyone started podcasts. And I was like, oh, guess we have to do the pivot thing, figure out how to continue eating food and living indoors. And that's kind of where Could Be Pretty Cool, the company, formalized. And it's part of what I've been doing ever since.
I love that. As you were speaking, you mentioned during the pandemic, we all know what that did to the world. But that's a weird time, right? Because people are consuming so much content, right? But you being in the theater space, right? There's like this really big shift that needs to happen. While people are clamoring for content, you can't necessarily go to the theater or go to the stage where you're used to giving them that content. Like, talk a little bit about like how did that feel? Like, I don't I'm trying to get a good idea, a little bit more of an idea of what you were going through, because again, the world was clamoring for Netflix and chill, right? The moments families were doing this in mass, but then here's somebody like you who's creating content for a living, and you can't necessarily do it.
It was humbling. It was definitely humbling to see how quickly an entire industry could disappear because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. I think that the theater industry did a really good job of like figuring things out. That's when we started seeing more innovation with live streams of performances, or, some theaters were finding ways to do maybe one person shows and just recording them. And, there was a lot of innovation going on, including radio plays. A lot of radio plays came back, a lot of like outdoor things that people could drive, through and see people outside on the stage performing. While it was really bizarre and frankly a little bit scary, I will say that there was a spirit of that kind of like the show must go on nature really did, kick in for a lot of folks. And so there was also a lot of innovation and a lot of the rules being thrown out of the window because no one had experienced a time when we literally could not gather together and make work. So it was, I guess, humbling would really be the sentiment I would stand on, but also like a lot of things during that time, we figured out things in a way that we never would have had to if we didn't have these challenging circumstances. And I think a lot of that as entrepreneurs and creative entrepreneurs is what we do every day. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's some of that like that grit is built into the journey as a creative, right? You have to really figure things out. As we, most people know, some may not know, like living as a creative, right? And that's your 9 to 5. The pays aren't always, what they should be, and so you really do have to figure things out. And so some of that is built into your DNA. But I'm curious, um, from a entrepreneur perspective, like did you have any experiences with it prior to the pandemic that may have prepared you for this point that you're at now, where you have this company, like you said, pen to paper, and now it's an official business out in the world that you're doing things with? Like, were there any experiences prior to the pandemic, that you drew upon?
Maybe none that I was aware of at the time. I would say in my role as a sound designer for theater, that was freelance. And so I was 1099 contract. You're on a show 2, 3 months, then you're done, you get your check, you move on to the next thing. And so while I was doing that for like 4 or 5 years, I guess I didn't connect that, like, oh, I, as an independent contractor, am a small business in a way. Like, if I don't show up and do the work, I'm not going to get more work. And therefore, me as a small business, I'm not going to exist. That wasn't like, again, like consciously what I was thinking, but that definitely ended up sort of weaving its way when I became a business and, went through the Secretary of State and got the business license. That is like, oh, it's the same thing. Even though now I've moved on to podcasts, if I don't deliver things on time for a client, if I deliver something that is not up to what we discussed or up to a standard, I'm not going to continue working with this client. If, I don't show up as my best self, if we're not doing what we were hired to do, we're not going to continue to work. And so I think a lot of that scrappy mentality as a freelancer definitely like drives me now. But I guess even like in this interview, I didn't make the connection until like just now. Like, oh yeah, I guess so, but I didn't know it.
And that's okay. Like, there's certain things that are just embedded in our story, right? And you're moving, like you're figuring things out, and then later on, maybe when you have some time to reflect, you start to like piece things together, like, oh yeah, that experience did help me out, somewhat. I'm curious, like, you made this decision to start something on your own. Typically, people go to their inner circle first, family, close friends, and they tell them. I'm curious, like, what was that experience like? What was the feedback you got? Tell me yours, and I'll be more than happy to tell you mine as well.
Sure. So again, I think in my case, I was sitting in the house. And at the time I was staying with my parents because of like other circumstances, but it all worked out because, they couldn't leave the house anyway. And so when I was like, yeah, I had participated in 2019 in a workshop, sort of boot camp style program through Spotify for women of color to learn about podcasting. And so that was really my first entryway into learning about the podcast industry, but I had no intentions of actually really pursuing it as a career. And so when I was like, yeah, I'm going to make podcasts now, I'm going to try to license and sell podcasts and do work for other people. I think there was, because I've always been in the arts, a little bit of like, oh, this is like another art school thing that Casey's doing. But it wasn't until the opportunities started popping up and I was able to start, making a living off of this, that my family especially was like, "Oh, I still don't know what this is, but apparently it's a thing." So, yay. And I would definitely say, and I would love to learn about your experience with this. 2020, so I would say maybe into 2021, beginning of 22, it felt like a renaissance for indie creators. It felt like there were more opportunities to get heard and seen, and people were taking chances. And so, building a company at that time, it was like, oh, she does appear to be succeeding and working. Like, this is great. As things have sort of, I'll say, course corrected in the podcast industry. I think that there tends to be on my end like a little more explaining to do. Like, well, no, I'm not doing the big major show, but I have this client, or I'm not doing, you know, something that I'm traveling around the country, but I am still doing stuff. A little bit more of that's happening now. But yeah, I would be curious to know about your origin story, and then also if you have any thoughts about like the way the industry has shifted over the past couple years.
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. I just want to say being on with another podcaster because they ask me questions, and it gives me a chance to sit on the other side of the camera to some extent. For me, it was the listeners have like seen me like give bits and pieces of this, but I'll definitely try to put it together concisely. I was corporate America my entire life. Majored in mathematics, worked at a lot of the big banks here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so my whole career was just career guy. You wear a suit every day, stuff like that. And so the pandemic for me was, you mentioned like this renaissance. It was this period for me of like, it was refreshing for me because I was like, well, I can stop wearing my suit now. I don't have to. There's not this expectation like I'm going into the office. We're still doing things virtually from a corporate perspective. But I started to interact with more and more creatives. Like you mentioned, the creative, like that period, right? That 2020, 2021. And so it was really cool and refreshing. I connected with so many different Black people from different walks of life that was what drew me into like, hey, how do I like start telling stories on my own? Like, who can I connect with? And I use the lens of, well, I come from corporate America. I want to focus on business because I feel like that's where I can add some value for folks, right? Who I can frame it the right way because that's what I'm used to. But I can still, looking at all these amazing Black creatives that I'm interacting with, still make it my own. And so from those interactions on apps like Clubhouse, all kinds of different spaces. Like I was on forums. I don't know why I was on the forums, but it was just amazing. I was connecting with, again, Black excellence across different industries. And so that's what made me say, hey, you know what? Like, even if I do still do a 9 to 5, this podcasting thing, I can, build it out more. And I think when I told my inner circle, they was like, oh, this is a hobby of Kenny's. Right. But then when I started to go from 5 episodes, 10 episodes, 20 to 30, 40, like even some of them afterwards came to me and they was like, oh, yeah, I always saw you doing something like this on your own. You're making it your own. It's what you want to make it. And they saw me doing things like this with my life. And so at first it was that blind just support. Hey, I'll click on Kenny's link on Facebook, Instagram, whatever the social media outlet was. But then they started to see I was more committed and I was putting time and energy and money into it. They started to embrace it a little bit more. At times they still don't know. Like, the elders in my family, they're not going to necessarily, like you said, they're just like, oh, this is just something Kenny's doing. And as long as Kenny's happy doing it, content, they're willing to support it, I think.
Absolutely. Like two things that I just want to put out, and then I'm gonna let you get back to your interview. I'm sorry. Number one, shout out to Clubhouse. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I did not realize how instrumental that was in that like 2021 period of still being able to network and to be able to network with people who otherwise I never would have talked to or met. And some are still folks who like we've worked together now. We've been on each other's projects. We've like done stuff. So I love that you mentioned Clubhouse. And then the second thing, I love that you come from corporate America. I think that for some reason still in the creative community, there's still a lot of like, if you're not doing this full time, then you're not serious about it or you're not. No, we all, again, we need to eat, We need to live indoors. And not everyone wants to make their creative passion, their projects, the main thing that they're doing to survive, because it sometimes can feel like a chore. And so for like people listening, I want everyone to feel valid in whatever their creative path is. If it is, I have my 9 to 5 and I do my painting and go to art shows on the weekends, or if it's, I want to be a full-time painter and this is all I ever want to do and I'm going to pursue this full-time forever. Everybody's journey is valid. So just want to shout out those points.
Great points. Many founders, not very many founders, specifically in minority communities, are going to have that ability to go out and just start their business, and then, like you said, not worry about paying the bills and doing all these other things. And so it's just a natural part of it for most founders. You have to juggle. It's a skill set you're going to have to manage throughout your time founding your business, while also making sure your nucleus is secure. And so I appreciate you for calling that out, because that's something consistently I've heard from the founders that we've had on, is just balancing that family dynamic, things that happen while pursuing your passion. And then hopefully you get to that point where that passion project turns into a full-fledged business, and you can just solely work on that and be happy and excited every single day waking up. We know that that's not always going to be the case. So
Oh, yeah.
talk to me a little bit about how the experience of being a founder has been, from a learning perspective. You mentioned being a creative. It sounds like you've been a lifelong creative. So I'm curious, like, what are some of those moments of learning that you've had so far, as you've built out Could Be Pretty Cool?
So I would say, sticking with the humbling theme, some of the most humbling things I've had to learn are creating things for yourself and creating things for other people, meaning like someone hires you to make a thing for them, are not the same process. And that's fine. And you have to deal with it early. I think some of my earliest gigs of like coming onto someone else's show as an associate producer or production coordinator, I would come in with the mentality of like, oh, well, I would do it this way because X. And if the person in charge is like, that's not how we do it, we're not going to do that, I would take it very personally. It's like, well, why did you hire me then? Well, what am I even here for? But I've come to the point now where I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to figure out some way to document that I have given my suggestion, so that ultimately, if something happens in the end, I can't be like, I didn't try to tell you, but it's not my show. And so I'm just here to support your show. I'm here to support your work, your narrative, and ultimately being that person, showing up, doing the best for other people, as I mentioned earlier, is how you get asked to come back. It's how you get recommended for the next thing. If you're showing up on other people's stuff, trying to dictate their world, they're not going to want you around. They're not going to tell other people about you. So that was kind of learning number one. Learning number two, I guess, business wise, I mean, there's just so much that I went to school undergrad for music and minored in theater. I went to grad school for sound. So my whole education has been in the arts. That whole time, I maybe took a business class, but not a business class that was specific for creator businesses. Like that wasn't a thing that existed. And so just kind of the realities of, this is, articles of incorporation. You need this kind of license to do this. This is how you separate your money. Don't ask me to think about taxes. Like, my Lord, 2021 was the most humbling year financially for me when I got that tax bill from getting all these 1099s. And I'm like, I'm doing it. Good Lord. So there's just a lot, I think, of business 101 proper that I unfortunately had to learn by experiencing versus someone saying, by the way, make sure you're setting aside XYZ dollars, set up a quarterly payment system, etc. And I would say the third thing that I'm really starting to learn now is that I don't have to do the things that I hate. I can hire someone else to do it. And yes, that's always the toss up between, okay, I'm coming out of my bag, but again, that thing of like the thing that you love turning into a chore is what I'm trying to avoid. Contrary to popular belief, even if you work for yourself, you can burn out. And because we often don't have the same type of like, okay, 9 to 5 done. Okay, Saturday, Sunday, I'm not working kind of filters around us, we can probably burn out faster working for ourselves. And so, we're heading into year 5. I've just recently been like, I hate editing. I really do. I know someone who's really good at it. I'm going to just have to pay them to do it for me rather than hate my life all week. So, yeah, I would say those are the 3 biggest learnings for me so far. But learning every single day, seriously.
Yeah, you just dropped some gems there. I'm not going to touch on all three. I will just say amazing feedback and taxes. You are not alone. I'm scared to do taxes on my own or touch any document that has to do with taxes. And so I can imagine looking at 1099s. I've done that before as well through my business, and it can get muddy very quickly. And you can end up owing Uncle Sam a lot of money. So commend you for going through that experience, and you're here today. And so that means things are progressing quite nicely. But appreciate you being transparent. I think there's always parts of the business, right? Unless we've actually gone through the experience of running a business before, there's going to be parts that are going to be learning experiences for us. You mentioned the parts. Why do stuff that you hate? That's something that I feel like is one of like my, I don't want to call it a commandments of life, but that is where I'm at in this point in my life. Definitely not trying to do too many things that I hate. And if there's a AI robot out there that'll do it, or a human being who enjoys doing it, I'm usually willing to pay uh, for that service. And you touched on something there. There's this consistent theme I'm hearing as I'm talking to founders, specifically in the creator space, around just like B2B businesses that support creators. The creator economy. I'm always interested, and I'm always plugging. For those who are listening who don't have a business yet, if you want to support creatives, we have a creative here, Kacie, who just told you there's parts of her business that she's looking to not do, and she's willing to have somebody partner with. And B2B specifically is a space where I don't think there's enough Black founders, but I'm hoping that over the next couple of years we see somewhat of a course correction there, specifically for the creator economy.
I
Uh,
I I hope so too. Just want to say that. Okay. Whew.
yeah. So one of the taglines I saw online for could be pretty cool. You're producing unique creative experiences that inspire community building through the arts. And so I want you to tell folks a little bit about like what's currently like on the docket for the company. Like what can they expect to see as they engage with the brand, and just what can they look forward to coming from your media production company. And I know you're doing a whole host of things, but if I were to label it one thing, I would definitely say you're a media company. But just give folks a little idea as they connect with your brand what they can look forward to.
Sure thing. So, right now we are expanding our coverage on Could Be Pretty Cool News, which is our flagship podcast that actually is all about creative entrepreneurship. So, on every episode, we interview someone who works as either a researcher or an academic or ecosystem builder, an expert in some way about the creator economy, just because, a lot of times when we hear creator economy, the first thing people think about is like, oh, a TikToker with 20 million followers who makes a living off of brand deals. Like, yes, that is a type of person in the creator economy. But most people, they look like us. They're folks who do this as a passion. They do this as a thing they're trying to grow. They do this in the trenches for years and years before that big opportunity comes, if it ever comes realistically. And so we want to be more conscious about actually talking about the data and the numbers and the trends and the research as more of these conversations are starting to be had. Conversations like those that are had on your program. This is relatively new, hearing founders in different spaces just talk about how they got started, or, hot takes or things that they've learned. And so we feature an expert and we feature a narrative story from a creator or an independent artist. Basically, just like, tell us your story. How did you get started? What are things that you learned? Again, just to continue putting out into the ecosystem content about realness about creators. And so we featured costume designers, we featured composers, we featured comedians, folks who are working in the arts and creative fields. And we really are just like, tell us how you are doing it. Tell us what you would want someone to tell you 5 years ago. And so that is our current program that we work on internally. We did some live events in May, where we did some live podcast recordings. So looking to do some more like community building with creators to get more input. And then, yeah, we produce stuff for other people, as I mentioned, working with some nonprofits, some universities to produce their podcast. But yeah, we are very excited about the way that could be pretty cool news is letting us tell stories about other creators.
Yeah, as you were talking out, you were mentioning about, costume designers, people that are in different elements of art. That brought me back to, just the different ways I look for folks to support, beyond normal. For example, I'm not a music expert. I don't know how to play instruments, right? In certain aspects. And so for our intro song, I reached out to a producer, right? And so that was an example of, okay, whatever their service fee was, I'm willing to pay for that, because then I know it's a quality product. They give me some options. But that's somebody, as you were thinking, like, there's different ways that this economy flows and the dollars flow in and out of, our pockets. But in certain instances, that dollar that you spend with a creative, it definitely makes sure that the economy grows even further. And then I'm able to be supported. My business is supported. My podcast is supported with a quality song on that I don't have to worry about clearance and copyright and all those good things, because they do a lot of that stuff for me. And so
Absolutely.
introducing folks to that, I could see there's some benefit for your listeners, because then they can tap in with those individuals. And that's definitely something I think that aligns and it is along the same path that we're going with Beyond Normal as well.
Oh yeah, you can clearly tell you're a creator conscious brand. You have your logo designed. You have design
Mhm.
on your hat. Like, that is exactly the point of what we're trying to illustrate. Like, again, you don't have to be a content creator, TikTok dancer, which is great. We love, please get your bag however you get it. But the creator economy consists of so many different types of folks, and we can plug in really in so many different types of places for so many different types of businesses. So you demonstrate that with
I
your brand.
I appreciate that. One question I gotta ask. Um, I've asked quite a few creatives that I've been interviewing recently. Like, how do you look at the focus on AI? And I'll give you an example. Right, you mentioned you were in the theater. Um, I know that Disney, for example, right, like, they've gone away from the sets where there's like explosions everywhere and doing all these things, right? So they have like this one big ass screen, if I can call it that, and then a lot of the stuff happens in the background, and they can make it look like it's actually real and it's happening. And there's this big, they're on acres and acres of land, but it's really all happening in front of this screen. Like, what are your thoughts around AI and that direction that it's going, for creatives like yourself and just others that are coming up? Like, what does that mean? What's the impact of seeing some of these things come to fruition?
Sure. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic about being team AI. As you mentioned earlier, using AI to do some of the tasks that, not necessarily that I hate, but things like writing show notes, for example, for episodes, or even just, summarize this transcript and pull out some good quotes that could be used for social promotion. Like that's something that could have taken hours, goodness, this time last year even. And so I think for creators, a lot of those administrative tasks, those repetitive tasks, having more time to actually do stuff by using AI, definitely a plus. Another on the plus column, I actually just saw the Venice Film Festival this year is doing an AI shorts competition. And so it's you can submit a short film that's made with any of the AI tools. It can be all AI, hybrid. And so there could be a kid right now in his bedroom who has been dreaming of going to a film festival, making a film, but hasn't had the money or the funding or the support. And is like, oh, but I can figure this out. And now this person has an opportunity to have their work seen all over the world. I think that for indie creators who don't have the resources to get their hands on the fire and the special effects pulled in, AI can also be a great kind of starting off point to show people this is what I can do with these tools that I have. Now that you see that, like, maybe give me some more bread, I can show you really what I can do. um but I would say most of my cautiousness really is more about the, I guess, sort of big corporations' aspirations with AI. So I recognize that the role of the corporation is to make money for stakeholders. And if they can find a way to get rid of humans or replace things that humans used to do with AI, they're going to do it to get more money for stakeholders. So I just hope that there is going to be a balance moving forward with opportunities for indie folks and folks who are already kind of in the industry to like keep their jobs.
Well said. I've heard similar pros and cons from other creatives. I myself, I feel like I'm new to this space, and so I'm more of a sponge. And so I want to ask somebody like you, who's really been living this life for quite some time, what do you see from the pros and the cons? But I completely agree with you. Right, there's got to be some balance. I can see, in the foreseeable future, right, there being a significant push by consumers to see um, more indie products, projects, or and just like see something different. Like there's only so many shades. I hate to harp on just this one brand. There's only so many costumes I want to see Mickey Mouse wear before we start to change it up and try to. All right, like what's the new version of that for the next generation that's coming up. Like, who are these characters that they're going to be connected to? It's okay if they're not the characters that I watch. Like, I think that should be something we're okay with, versus saying we're going to have the same character be on all the commercials and everything for 100 years straight. I don't think that's reasonable. So I'm excited to see those new, fresh ideas, like you said, those kids that are coming up, how they leverage the tool. I'm already seeing with my nephew and just my little cousins how they leverage AI for some of the graphics, and they do some really cool things that I was not doing at their age. I'll
And
put
that's
it.
what we have to remember. Yeah, when CDs were coming out, there were people ahead of us like, "Ew, CDs, tape is the only way to go." It's
Mhm.
just it's the nature of technology. It's gonna be another generation growing up with a whole new set of tools to play with that is going to completely blow our minds.
Got it. And so, in closing, I want to thank you so much, Kacie, for coming on, just sharing, a little bit about your story. Folks can obviously follow up. Tell them, I guess, two things. Tell them how they can connect with the brand. What's the best way for them to stay, present and see, what's coming along for could be pretty cool. And then just the lasting comment you want us to close out on. I want to make sure the floor is yours. Let our, whatever our listeners need to remember for them from this conversation, let them know what they need to take away.
Sure thing. So yes, you can find us at couldbeprettycool.com, at couldbeprettycool on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I guess any takeaway would be don't do things that you hate. Of course, there's going to be some inevitable parts of running a business that aren't always going to be fun. There's not always going to be easy, but building something that is yours, building something that comes from you, shouldn't come from a place of like suffering. And this is a lot of do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, don't do things that you hate. Why? Life is way too short.
Perfect way to end it. Thank you for coming on again, Kacie. And for our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. Peace.
Bye.